Welcome back to History 1301. Today we're going to begin our lecture on the American Revolution. Before we begin though, I'd like to go over the objectives for today's lecture. So these are coming out of chapter 4, the last part of chapter 4 that we didn't cover in the previous unit. The first thing that we're going to do is recall the impact of the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening on colonial America. And then we're going to talk about how by 1763, most American colonists had become used to making their own decisions and taking care of their own needs. So we are going to be identifying and explaining the events in Britain that contributed to this situation and their effects on the colonists. I want to remind you that you should be looking at your unit objectives every time that we begin a new unit, anytime that we begin anything really, an assignment. You are going to find this right in your modules. I put this on there so that you can see exactly what it is that we're going to be covering and how the assignments, and most important of all, the tests are aligned, okay? So if you head on over to the modules, go down to Unit 2, and I have this for Unit 1 as well. Right, but you want to go to Unit 2, click on that to be successful in this unit. Read over the modules so that you can see what we're going to be doing, okay? They're located right there. Okay, part of this unit as well is chapters 5 and 6, so those objectives are there. And whenever you do an assignment, you'll notice that the objectives that are going to be covered in that assignment are the same ones that are here, okay? So anyways, just a little tip right there. Okay, so let's talk about what is going on with the Enlightenment, especially how it pertains to, the American colonies. So part of what's going on, and again, this relates to, chapter 1 and chapter 2, but part of what is going on in Europe, especially because the American Enlightenment is sort of a spin-off of the European Enlightenment movement. But what's happening here is an actual moving away from medieval thought, okay? And so all of this is going to result in the development of the American political system as we know it, and the ideas and the belief that people had, certain rights, is essentially going to play a huge role in the American Revolution and the justification for the breaking away with Britain. So let's talk about the Enlightenment, okay? The Enlightenment is, like I said, it's a moving away from medieval thought, but more than anything, it's emphasis on prioritizing human capacity to reason, and that being the highest, form of achievement a person could attain. Okay, now this, of course, is all taking place in a world where most of the population is illiterate. Most of the population is superstitious. Most people are, afraid of an angry God. They are pretty much ignorant to the world around them. And they ignore, and by ignorant and ignore, I mean that they don't know, they are not educated. They don't have access to this kind of information, and they basically defer all the decision making to, the ruling class, the people that are in the top echelon of society. So if you remember when we were talking about feudalism and how, European society had been developed, the structure that it had, right? At the very bottom were mostly peasants who were illiterate, who were superstitious, who feared an angry God, and they lived their life that way. But through the Renaissance and all of the religious wars and the questioning of authority that is happening, is a precursor to European exploration. This is where the Enlightenment begins to take shape. And so you might have heard of guys like Copernicus, for example, right, that began to kind of question traditional beliefs, questioning the church and stuff like that. And so, eventually he gets into a whole bunch of trouble, gets thrown in prison, but it doesn't end there, okay? So part of what's happening here and what the Age of Reason is about, it's about shifting the focus, shifting the power to humans, right? To regular people, rather than the divine, right? Especially rulers, right? The ruling class who ruled by divine right. Part of what contributes to this development is the scientific revolution, as well as the printing press, right? Having more access to information, to books, education. So we see higher literacy rates, more people can read, more access to books and stuff like that. And so the result of this is, of course, more human knowledge, a much more educated population. And so this is going to result in a questioning of just about everything, the world around them, the natural world, the spiritual world, the political world, churches, you name it. What we're starting to see here is a complete, well, not complete, but the beginning of a rejection of authoritarianism. And not only that, but this idea, this belief that kings ruled because they were chosen by God to do so. That this belief that there was something special about them, that they're like God, ruling on earth. And so the big sort of consequence of that is, prior to the Enlightenment, people didn't question kings, right? You didn't question their decisions. You didn't question if they changed their religion, and now all of a sudden you go from being Catholic to being Protestant to being Catholic again. I mean, you basically did what the king told you. But this is all going to start to break away as a result of this, a desire to know more, to question things. You got these amazing, philosophers that come out of this, like Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who else? Montesquieu. So many of these, really like ideas about people's or humans, innate ability to achieve reason, to be able to make these decisions for themselves, rather than have somebody tell them what to do, or, whether that be the church or the government or whatever other institutions. And the consequence of this is that the relationship between people and those institutions is going to start to get questioned, but also we're going to start to see those cracks develop as well. Okay. Now in Europe, you have all kinds of different social gatherings, like the salons and stuff like that, where people would get together and, they would, over dinner and over lots of drink and lots of food, they would share, the latest ideas, the latest theories that are out there. It's really like an explosion of new ways of thinking. And like I said, sometimes it's going to get these people into trouble. It's going to, like Voltaire gets thrown into the Bastille. And if you ever get a chance to look at some of their writings, like Candide or Emile, you'll see exactly what this was. These guys were like celebrities, in their time. And so, those ideas are going to start off in Europe. those theories. It's going to generate a lot of interest. It's going to create a lot of, problems for the ruling class, problems for the kings that are used to ruling without any kind of questions. But as those ideas come and reach the American colonies, we're going to see how, theories about these God-given inalienable rights are going to become the foundation for the justification or for the arguments for breaking away with France. Okay, so these things, we're going to get into it more as we proceed with the coming chapter. But I wanted to start off by touching on this, because we cannot talk about, no taxation without representation, without touching on the Enlightenment. I mean, how dare these colonists question, what Parliament or the King of England is doing? Where did they even get the gall, like the audacity to question these kings or the government, right? And so, again, it comes from this unique American experience of living in the colonies, of not having the same social hierarchy, of not having the same social pressures as people back in Europe. But also, once you get that combined with the Enlightenment ideas, that's where it gets really interesting, okay? So where all of that really, really develops is when England begins or attempts to take away salutary neglect. Okay, they're trying to clamp down more and more on the English colonies. So remember, they're English colonies, they're English colonists, English citizens, but they have been relatively free to make their own decisions. They have their own government, they pass their own taxes, they pass their own laws. As long as the laws did not contradict the laws back home in England, the English colonists could pretty much govern themselves and tax themselves, and they were used to that. This is what salutary neglect is about. Right? It sounds kind of bad, like neglect. Neglect is bad. You neglect a dog, you neglect a kid, you go to jail. But in the case of the colonists, salutary neglect wasn't a bad thing. It basically was this relationship between the English colonies and the mother country, where, England is not going to get involved. Yes, they are English citizens, but they govern themselves and they take care of themselves. And the thing about it is, the colonists got used to that. So, as a consequence of the French and Indian War, where the English are trying to have more control, trying to take away some of those freedoms away from them, that's when the colonists are going to go, hey, wait a minute, we don't really like what's happening here. We don't like where this is going, and they start to develop these arguments against English, the attempted expansion of English control, okay? So let's talk about the French and Indian War, okay? Or the 7 Years' War, right? It takes place between 1754 and 1763. Where does this originate from? Well, remember, as the English colonists, right? They settled all the way from, they're all the way down to South Carolina now, all the way up to Massachusetts, which is also Maine. We know it as Maine today. They're up and down the entire eastern seaboard. And as they continue to expand west, who's in the way? Well, the French, right? Remember the French, they settled up in Canada and into the Great Lakes and in the Ohio River Valley. So they're here, and the English colonists are moving west, and then, as they continue to push further, they run into the French. And so neither side wants to back down. Neither side is willing to, give up claim to the land that is there that they want. I remember that land lust is a huge problem as well. But the French try to intimidate the colonists by building these military forts, like Fort Duquesne, for example, and to be able to kick and keep the English out. But it doesn't work. The colonists are going to continue to press on. George Washington is going to try to lead some men into Fort Duquesne, and it's a disaster. I mean, they're going up against the French and French soldiers, right, no less. And it's a terrible disaster. This is one of the things that Washington sort of carries with him as well, is how he leads his men into their deaths, essentially. But more on him a little bit later on. Anyways, there's conflict over land between the English colonists and the French. They're unable to resolve it. So what happens here? Well, it leads to war. And now the English have to send in troops in order to defend, the land that the English are claiming, but also to protect its English colonists. And so this is how, the French and Indian War gets started. And it's called the French and Indian War because the English colonists are fighting the French and their Indian allies, okay? So anyways, let's talk about some attempts at resolving this conflict. The Albany Congress and the Albany Plan is an attempt to build colonial unity, right? So you've got these 13 colonies, and so it's a call to action. They want representatives from each of the colonies to go and to meet and to discuss and come up with a plan to, unify. This is the first time that the colonies are going to meet for a unified cause. Remember, these are, we think of them as 13 colonies, but they're like 13 different countries, right? You got people from different parts of Europe arriving. They have different economies. They have different societies. They've developed totally different. And remember, this is part of Unit 1. And so when they arrive, first of all, not all the colonies send representatives. Only seven colonies are represented, right? So already they're starting off bad. And so it is significant, though, because it's the first time that they attempt at some kind of colonial unity, but it fails because the colonists fail to see any kind of similarities or connection or bond with one another. Like I said, there are like 13 different countries at this point. Even though they're all English colonies, they do not see that somebody from Virginia has anything in common or worth fighting for with somebody from New York. Okay, and so they have no allegiance to each other. They have allegiance to their colony, but that's about it. And so the whole plan, the Albany Plan, the Albany Congress, completely fails to materialize, completely fails to bring unity to the colonies against the French. They just don't identify with each other. But interestingly, through the process of fighting alongside with the British against the French, this is going to have one of those like ironic effects where it is going to create that unity, but not for the reasons that you think. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit and talk about the Treaty of Paris, which is going to officially end the French and Indian War. Okay, anytime you have a war, even if both sides have stopped shooting at each other or stopped fighting, you cannot have an end to the war unless you have a treaty. Okay, and the Treaty of Paris of 1763 is what ends the French and Indian War. Okay, so what are the takeaways from it? Why is the Treaty of Paris important or significant? And that's because the English are going to kick the French out, and they're going to get control of Canada and all the land east of the Mississippi River. Okay, so now the French have been, just expelled. And it's like, yeah, woohoo, right? I mean, if you're an English colonist, this is what you wanted, right? You were expanding west, and the French are there, and they don't want to move, and it leads to war, and England has to bring in reinforcements, and they send troops, and you fight them for 7 years, and you win, and now the French are gone. Yay, that's what we wanted, right? So now everything goes back to normal? Not so fast. Let's talk about what happens as a consequence of the French and Indian War, okay? The French and Indian War is important for 4 reasons. The first one is because, and this is where the irony comes in, okay? The experience of fighting alongside the English, right? We're talking about English colonists fighting next to English soldiers, professional career soldiers, right? Who had to come and rescue their butts. They don't like how the English treat them. They feel as though, they look down on them. They look at them as, like country bumpkins. And with good cause, because they look at the colonists and, they're undisciplined. They don't follow orders. They don't like being told what to do. Surprise, surprise, right? What America does. And, they get treated pretty badly. The British are condescending, even though they're on the same side, right? They're both British. Both sides are British. But they fear that these British guys don't respect them. That they don't, see them as the men that they see themselves as. And so this creates a lot of contempt, a lot of resentment between the colonists and the British people that come over here. Because like I said, they don't treat them well, they're disrespectful, they're condescending. Yeah, so that's kind of like the irony there. So the other reason why the French and Indian War is important is because finally the colonists start to realize that, hey, you know what? Like, you might be from Virginia and I might be from New York, but we might actually have more in common with each other than we thought, especially against those guys from, back home in England. Because they look down on us, because, they don't respect us. They think that we're, like these, peasants. And so for the first time, remember, they tried this at the Albany Congress. It didn't work. But now through the experience of fighting side by side with those British troops, now they're starting to realize, you know what? We've got something over here that those guys don't have, and they'll never understand. And so through the experience of the French and Indian War is when we first start to see any kind of semblance of colonial unity between, the 13 different colonies. Now, the third reason why the French and Indian War is significant has to do with the cost of the war. Wars are expensive, and this is going to be a huge financial burden for England, because they have to send troops, they have to feed them, they have to, supplies and guns and ammunition and lives and time. And so what does it mean? Even after they win, even after they expel the French, it means that, there's going to be a huge loss, a huge financial loss for Britain. They went into debt, fighting the French and Indian War. And like I said, even if it turned out as a victory, Britain is going to go into debt, massive amounts of debt. They take out huge loans. And so what's going to happen now that the debt is there? Well, they have to pay it back. And what's a way that all governments pay their debts? By putting in taxes, implementing taxes to recoup some of the money that they lost. And this is no different, okay? So when the British attempt to recoup some of those losses by passing on those taxes to the colonists, who, by the way, were the benefactors of this war, right? Who benefited from it? The colonists did. So who should have to pay for it? The colonists should, right? I mean, there's no question about it. But that's where they get into trouble, because when they start to impose those taxes on the colonists without even asking or consulting them, especially when they were used to taxing themselves, that's where we start to see a problem, okay? And then lastly, number 4, huge reason why the French and Indian War is important is because as the French are expelled, right, because they lost, they're expelled out of the New World, out of Canada, all of those land claims there, it's gone. And this is going to make the French really angry. And they are hungry. They are thirsty for revenge, okay? And so when the English colonists start to talk about no taxation without representation, when they start to picket and boycott and demonstrate and, throw the tea overboard and stuff like that, the French are looking at this like, gosh, that's interesting. Wouldn't it be great if the colonists, actually defeated the British? Because France and England are traditional rivals, right? They've been at war with each other forever. And so the French would love it. They would love it if the colonists would win, but they're not going to get involved right away. Okay? They're going to wait. They're going to bide their time until the moment is right, until those colonists, right, those upstarts, can prove that they can actually defeat the British. That's when the French are going to get involved. That's when the French are going to go into an alliance with the American colonists. And you guys, this is the most important reason of all. And I say this all the time. But without the French alliance, the colonists don't have a chance. I mean, they're always like one battle away from complete failure, from complete obliteration. I mean, we look at Washington like, oh, he's this great general and great president and all that, but part of the strategy is to run away, to run away from the British. I mean, quite literally, it's like, nope, we're not going to win. Let's go. But as silly as that sounds, it works. It works because it frustrates the heck out of the British. They're not used to that. They want them to just stand and fight like a man, like a gentleman, and Washington won't give in. But despite that, they're always just one, battle away from losing it all. And if it's not for the French alliance, right, that comes in after the Battle of Saratoga, if it's not for the French alliance, there's no way. I mean, I would be willing to put my retirement, into this as a bet. There's no way that the colonists can win. Because what do the French bring in as their alliance? Well, yes, troops, French money, but more importantly, French guns, more importantly, French leadership, right? Lafayette, but the French Navy, right? And as we're going to talk about later on, when they finally corner Cornwallis at the Battle of Yorktown, they can't do that. They can't pull that off without the French Navy. And that's the game changer. So it all goes back to the French and Indian War. Why is this war significant? Don't worry about, what goes on during those 7 years. Why is that war significant? It causes resentment, contempt between the English colonists towards the English, right? Who they perceive as, they look down on them. They don't respect them. It creates colonial unity because now they realize, you know what? Maybe we have more in common with each other than we originally thought. And so again, this is important down the road. It's a huge financial burden for England, right? Who benefited from this? The colonists did. Well, should the colonists, who should pay for the cost of the war? It should be the colonists. It makes perfect sense. Not to the colonists, though, right? And that's where the whole no taxation without representation thing comes from, right? It's more complex than that, and we'll get into the details later. But fourth, final, and most important reason of all is the French anger. They want revenge, right? They got kicked out of the New World, and they want to see Britain pay. So when the time is right, because they're going to wait. They're not going to jump in right away because nothing would be worse for France than jumping in to, alliance themselves with a bunch of nobodies, right? And then to lose, right? That would be an even bigger embarrassment. So they're going to wait. They want revenge, but they're going to wait until these colonists can prove themselves. But when they do, it's a total game changer, okay? So that's all for today. That's all we're going to do. I just want to, get you on the edge of your seat and get you ready for the beginnings, the rumblings of the American Revolution. Okay, so come back and see me for the next lecture, and I hope you have a great day. See you later. Bye.